I'm Caleb Kidcoy, Epic Legacy Hero Builder, and I'd like to welcome you to Living Like a Bank. Along with myself, you'll hear from other successful experts and people who are busy serving and empowering many lives. You'll see how we're showing others to become debt-free in record time as they build economic discipline while generating a bulletproof family legacy revenue stream together. We'll learn how to live and operate just like the banks do. Hey, what's up, everybody? Caleb Kidcoy here, back at ya. Your alchemized slayer of mediocrity, heroic family legacy builder, and host of Living Like a Bank podcast. And we're back at you with the Business Book Club, talking about the controversial, intriguing, and most interesting book, 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Joined here in the studio with me, Mr. McFarland. What's up, Chris?
AKA Chris. What's up, Caleb?
Hey.
Rocking and rolling. Life's great. Business is great. What's that song? So where's our music designer? It's that song. You're the singer, man. Give me a lick of that summertime song. Like,
I know, right? You guys already got the vocal tease, so we have to shroud that in mystery. In fact, we'll be talking about that a bit in the next couple of chapters here. But we're in law number 6, which we're going to have some fun with here again. Court attention at all cost. Now, the judgment here, everything is judged by its appearance. What is unseen counts for nothing. Never let yourself get lost in the crowd, then, or buried in oblivion. Stand out. Be conspicuous at all costs. Make yourself a magnet of attention by appearing larger, more colorful, more mysterious than the bland and timid masses. Wow, that is a statement and a half, Chris, huh?
Well, yeah, Caleb, you remember that guy or girl back in high school who never did anything or said anything, right? I mean, I don't either, actually.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, yeah. Who are you talking about again? Precisely.
Right? I have no idea. I mean, I remember people like Michael who stood out.
Don't joke about our beloved producer. How dare you? No, I mean, absolutely, right? It's the people who differentiate themselves, who stand apart, especially in this overcrowded digital social media age. If you're not doing something different than the average Joe, it's really hard to be seen or heard. Now, part 1 here of this law, surround your name with the sensational and scandalous. So, again, I mean, here you go. Draw attention to yourself by creating an unforgettable, even controversial image. Court scandal. Do anything to make yourself seem larger than life and shine more brightly than those around you. Make no distinction between kinds of attention, because notoriety of any sort will bring you power. Better to be slandered and attacked than ignored. How true is that ringing today, right? We joked about these old stories and we're like, we need some modern comparisons. I think Michael's got something here for us.
Oh, I was just going to say, as Greene obviously knew the axiom, there is no such thing as bad publicity.
That's right.
Yep. Which is a rephrase of the P.T. Barnum thing he gives. And like we discussed, rather than spending a lot of time on the 19th century examples, we're going to try and give some more current examples that illustrate the same point. But I immediately thought of Ozzy Osbourne, Caleb.
Okay. You got my attention now, buddy.
Well, I thought I might. I mean, and like one of the most notable things I remember in my childhood, and for the record, I'm 53. I'm like a child of the 70s, and like Ozzy biting the heads off of chickens, was it's just something like how could you forget that, like and like. I was actually listening to an Ozzy song that just came up on a playlist, and I looked at the description, and it had an artist description, and the first sentence in the artist description is, if you need a description of who Ozzy Osbourne is, what rock music have you been listening to?
Oh, mercy.
But I mean, I actually want to go back a little bit older to a story. Everybody's heard that story about the chicken thing. And Caleb, I'm positive you know this story because you're a rock god. But I'm not sure that everybody knows this story. But remember the story about how before Ozzy was discovered, he used to drag a shoe around town, and the guys in the band, Tony Iommi and them used to joke about this fool who dragged around the shoe, and then he showed up at the audition. And they're like, "Hey, bloke, isn't that the guy who's dragging the shoe around?" And where's his bloody shoe? You know, and he started singing. But that actually brings me to the other point I really want to get to. If he was just the crazy guy with the shoe and he didn't have the great voice, wouldn't have worked. And going back to Greene's example, without even telling the whole story, they had this tricky thing to get people into the museum. If the museum wasn't great, people wouldn't have bought tickets. People wouldn't have gone back.
Right.
So you got to have the goods, right? And that's maybe what we can talk about constructively. Is like, what does it mean to have the goods? Like, it's all well and good to draw attention, but if there's no, well, I don't know, Kim Kardashian just called and said, I got away with there's no there.
I was starting to say without the delivery, but now you're giving examples that prove that's.
I mean, okay, maybe Caleb, has our modern world changed in any meaningful way, or would we just be kidding ourselves? Like, sure, we have new technologies, and obviously that gives, but does that fundamentally change it? Like, how you raised this question, how does one stand out in this overexposed world, particularly and especially in America? But in nowadays, it's not just America; it's all over the world. It's TikTok, and you know, I don't know, are people even on Instagram anymore? I don't know. I have no idea.
Oh yeah. But yeah, it's a legitimate question. You know, how do we stand out with all the noise and activity? And you bring up Ozzy, and the first thing that came to my mind was the first Ozfest that I ever attended in St. Louis, Missouri, and the amount of characters that I witnessed. I remember walking up the lawn, and the first character that I walked past was, I want to say, a 230-pound guy with, you know, hair down to the bottom of his back. And as I walked by him, he turned and went, and he had real fangs, like vampire fangs. And I went, like, real fangs, not the fake ones. I mean, the guy shaved them down. I don't know, maybe he's a legit vampire, but you know, you never forget those kind of things. So people that have created that image obviously attract people with that image too. And what did Greene say? Remember all we need to ensure success is notoriety. And I think as a whole, a lot of people look at negative publicity or negative media, right, as being what they don't want, because, oh, I don't want my image to be shrouded. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, that's okay, because you can essentially leverage that to get the kind of exposure that you're looking for, and then in turn create your own image, right? That's part of the mystery we kind of dig into that he talks about.
Yeah, and sticking strictly to this chapter, but just it does fit the theme that we've discussed in other chapters and other podcasts of sort of levels. It kind of depends on where you are. If you're an unknown person, and I guess we could go back to P.T. Barnum, but I like the example of Steve Jobs better, because Steve Jobs wasn't necessarily a great computer programmer per se. You know, I think he knew his way around a little bit. I'm sure Michael knows more about this than I do, which is why I'm hesitating a little bit. But Jobs famously was able to create an advertising campaign with you remember the Lemming commercial on Super Bowl Sunday? And he created that exposure. You're a little bit younger than we are, but there was this commercial that right before Apple really got big, where there was this Lemming commercial, and that aired on Super Bowl Sunday, and it was the big talk and everything, and it's just a modern example. Michael,
it wasn't Lemming. It was 1984. It was the runner, kind of with the hammer, and then threw it at the big screen because it was Big Brother on the screen and everything was gray. And then it was like, in 1984, it won't be like 1984 when the Macintosh debuts. And you didn't see the computer really. You didn't find any details about it. It was just this, negative thing against IBM and the old world, and saying the new world is coming, and 1984 won't be like 1984. And yeah, exactly. It's considered the most successful commercial of all time in terms of brand awareness.
Wow.
What could be better than that, right? And that's a modern example, right? And I think that's much more relevant to our audience than P.T. Barnum back in the day and whatever. I did look
that was back in the day for me, dude, because I was like 6 years old, which is probably part of the reason I don't remember that commercial.
That's a pretty good excuse, brother. And I'm glad that Michael, because the one I was talking about, Michael, must have been after it, because there was a commercial, the one I was talking about. Was that like the next year or two later?
Oh, that I don't recall. I just know the 1984 one is the one that, like, everyone remembers. It's
Right.
like I said, it's considered the most successful commercial, like, of all time. Pretty much, it's the most memorable commercial of all time.
And so in this day and age, we have old-fashioned advertising, but I don't know that would work in any sense in today's market, would it, Michael? Do you think? Considering how overexposed traditional advertising is and how much new advertising.
I mean, it definitely relates to part 2 on having an air of mystery.
There it is.
Good tease. Yep. So I guess the bottom line is, when it comes to exposure, all exposure can lead to notoriety, but I did look up notoriety, and it does mean the actual definition says according to something bad, like it's getting exposure from something bad. So I don't know that notoriety, like, I guess it's better than not getting noticed at all. That's pretty hard to argue with.
Right.
But
Well, 1984 provokes a memory of another controversial book, a guy named Orwell. But Barnum, going back to Barnum, right? It said he understood the fundamental truth about attracting attention. Once people's eyes are on you, you have special legitimately, and to create a crowd, you have to do something different and odd.
Right.
Okay.
Like, Michael, you would know more about this, so you'd give a better example. But like, for me, just as a casual computer person, I just remember, like, the shape of the Apple computer looked completely different than IBM and stuff like that. Michael, do you want to expound on that a little bit? Like, they had some there, right?
Oh yeah, no, it was distinctly different, and well, the big thing was the graphical interface. Was that it was the shape of the computer was unique and distinct, but it's that it was a big break from everything had been just text until that point, and you could talk about notoriety and Steve Jobs and the fact that he basically stole that from Xerox PARC, but no one outside the computer industry knew that Xerox PARC had created that interface. The first time they'd ever seen it was the Macintosh in 1984. So
now you're teasing chapter 7, which I like. I like that. There's nothing wrong with that. Come back for chapter 7. We're going to talk more about stuff like that.
So Greene makes a statement here, Chris. He says society craves larger than life figures, people who stand above the general mediocrity.
Yep.
I think that rings true as much today as it did before. Now, let's talk about this controversial point here. It says, if you find yourself in a lowly position that offers little opportunity for you to draw attention, meaning if the previous mentioned or aforementioned tactics have not worked for you, an effective trick is to attack the most visible, most famous, most powerful person you can find. Okay, this is common in politics. But what other examples come to mind for you where you can highlight this?
I would say, if you're using politics, that's exactly Chris Christie's campaign strategy right now.
Yeah, for very, very, I mean, but even going back a couple of years, Trump was an expert at that. Freaking phenomenal.
Yep.
Whatever you think about policies, purely as a tactical politician, Trump was amazing at that, what we're talking about. And Christie's doing that, trying to do that right now.
Well, you act like you're saying that Trump was a successful entrepreneur or businessman who understood marketing. Gosh darn it, Chris, what are you talking about?
I think that was his primary skill set all along, was promotion. I mean, Trump is probably the other example that we could use, other than Jobs. But going back to Steve Jobs, I think that he did a phenomenal job of standing out and like having his branding and his like typical like little black mock turtleneck and stuff, and like going up there on the stage or whatever. Michael should be talking here, not me, but they had these computer conventions and stuff, and it was a bunch of dorks and nerds that nobody paid any attention to, but Steve Jobs stood out. Michael, go.
Yeah, he was a master showman. I mean, he did know technology, and he knew the right people technology. He knew how to put products together, but by far something that he did that was something no one else in the computer industry knew how to do properly was how to self-market himself, was how to market his company, was how to give his brand an identity in a way that no other technology company knew how to do at the time. And people have chased it and tried to follow his example in a way that, very few people, I'd say, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk can't hold a candle to his ability to make people believe in what he wanted them to believe in.
Could we go so far as to say that the Tony Stark character as portrayed in the Iron Man movies is, in my opinion, is pretty much inspired by Steve Jobs?
Actually, that's funny because it's they've actually pretty much acknowledged that he was his public image in terms of him being a person in front of the public and everything was very much inspired by Elon Musk, as a matter of fact.
Musk?
Yes.
Musk? Really?
Yes.
I don't know, I see more Jobs, but whatever. If they said it, hey, they're the writers, right?
So let's expound into part 2 here, Chris, which we've been alluding to for some time now, and that is create an air of mystery. In a world growing increasingly banal, familiar, seems enigmatic, instantly draws attention, never make it too clear what you're doing or what you're about to do. Do not show all your cards. Sleight of hand, huh? An air of mystery heightens your present. It also creates anticipation. Everyone will be watching you to see what happens next. Use mystery to beguile, seduce, or even frighten. So we're talking about being larger than life here, right? As initially Greene highlights. But now we're talking about don't put all your chicken biting, bat biting, head tactics out there at once. Create an air of mystery.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
I love that you brought that back to Ozzy, because I was about to go rock and roll again. He gives some other different example of somebody back in history that I don't know. Let's talk about David Bowie. Okay. I mean, whether it's the Thin White Duke or any of his any other incarnations that he did, the Diamond Dogs and Gene Genie and all these different recreations that he did of himself, and the Low album, and he just constantly recreated himself and made something different and all of that. And we did discuss this just a tiny bit in one of our other podcasts, if you want to go back and look that up. But we talked about Andy Warhol. We talked, let's talk about Bob Dylan. I remember when I was growing up, my dad saying that somebody asked Bob Dylan what such and such a song was about. And Dylan said, well, I don't know. I just wrote it. Well, what does it mean to you? And that illustrates the principle of getting that air of mystery. And it does also illustrate saying less and making other people talk about you, which are other things we've talked about, right? But sticking to this chapter here, it is that air of mystery. And I think you can, when we talk about sex appeal, which is one of the examples that Greene talks about in the book, and we're just using more current examples. But he talks about a figure that we might have heard of, but none of us can really picture or anything, that this Mata Hari. But I think we can all picture, depending on our age, and maybe for a younger audience, there's people I don't even know about, because I'm certainly not hip, but I think of Madonna and Lady Gaga as people who created this air of mystery, right? And not only in their persona, but also purely just in their physical aspect of the different costumes and revealing just enough. And what's the word, Caleb? Titillation. Right?
Titillation. There you go. Titillating temptation. I mean, you act like you're saying sex sells here, Chris. I mean, come on now.
Well, there you go. There you go. Right.
And right here, Greene says it. That is the power of the mysterious. It invites layers of interpretation, right? Dylan, right, when he gave that response, basically he said, it's up to your personal interpretation here.
Exactly.
Excites our imagination, seduces us into believing that it conceals something marvelous. The world has become so familiar and its inhabitants so predictable, that what wraps itself in mystery will almost always draw the limelight to it and make us watch it.
Well, and again, going back to Apple, and probably Michael could give better examples here, and I'm just going to try and tee him up again. But Michael, as I was growing up, I remember Apple would always tease certain products and features, like leading up to things. Do you want to go from there?
Well, I mean, I'd say I could tie a couple of your kind of different points together there in terms of tying together the technology and art and power versus artists. I mean, that I'd say that traditionally artists themselves don't hold that much power, but I'd say in terms of this law, having an air of inscrutability, which I'd say can be attributed to artists, that that people who create music, people who create art have this air of inscrutability to them, that everyone wants to penetrate the veil and understand their process, and not being able to do that is what makes you interested in them and what
Right.
makes them interesting to you. And so people who are seeking power, technologists, politicians, people like that, want to have the air of the artist about them in order to successfully achieve part two of this law. And it's kind of that confluence of technology and power and art there, and kind of melding those all together into a gestalt is a way to achieve power, by having the air of the artist about you and that inscrutability. I keep using that term, but I really think it's the best way to really illustrate what he's shooting for there, in terms of having that mystery, is having that desire of people to want to understand you, but you're never going to let them get there 100%. That's power.
Yep. Yep.
And talk about the genius of Apple in their marketing approach. Think about their logo, the forbidden fruit, eating from the tree of the knowledge of the good and evil. Somehow they managed to tie all these elements into religion, right? Forbidden, mystery, mysticism, whatever you want to reference that to. But I always thought about how powerful that simple logo stood out, right? And created that, that air of mystery for Apple. Like hidden technology, forbidden fruit type of thing.
And, and just in terms of pure rule too, we talked about, this does tie in very much. If you're interested in this topic, I forget exactly which chapter it was, maybe 4, where we talked about talking less. And I can't help but think of Louis XIV and the air of mystery and inscrutability, going back to Michael's word, that he conveyed. The short story is the ministers would try and figure out different things and present it to him, but they spent all this work like trying to put together stuff. And they would come to him and he would just say, "I will see." Or we talked about the Kissinger story, where he'd have his aides do multiple drafts and like, "Is that the best you can do? Is that the best you can do? Is that the best you can do?" "Oh, it is? Okay, I guess I'll read it this time."
Right.
But those are both examples of keeping that air of mystery by saying less, right? And putting these all together. And that does increase. So I think trying to tie this all together, Caleb, at the outset of this podcast, you talked about how we can stand out in today's world. And so I think if we can say more with fewer words, that's one way we can stand out.
100%. And as we bring this full circle, Greene says, if you find yourself trapped, cornered, and on the defensive in some situation, try a simple experiment. Do something that cannot be easily explained or interpreted. Choose a simple action, but carry it out in a way that unsettles your opponent, a way with many possible interpretations, making your intentions obscure. Pretty much says it all there, doesn't it, Chris?
Yeah, and I immediately just think of pure strategies, and we've talked again in this podcast about just theming wise about chess and tennis, and so I'm going to give 2 examples. Even if people have only seen the show or heard about the show, people have heard of a Queen's Gambit, and all that really is the most obvious basic move by White, and then Black counters and does the same thing, and then White appears to make a mistake, an element of mystery. Okay, and without getting all into what happens after that, it does create an element of mystery that a skilled player on White can manipulate against an unwary player on Black. Okay,
right.
And then with tennis, and then you could probably give a better example here. I don't know if you got to watch any Wimbledon over the weekend, or if you.
I watched most of that final. That was something.
Okay, so give us some examples of how both players use drop shots, because I want to go drop shots, but why don't you talk about the tennis?
I mean, it's true. You wear your opponent down, you draw them in, you hammer away at them from the baseline, and then that wicked shrouded drop shot. At the time, they don't have the energy left or the willpower to make that full sprint. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. We saw it executed in, near perfection by both of those players. And, what a 5-set match that was. So closing up with the reversal, Chris. Greene mentions in the beginning of your rise to the top, you must attract attention at all costs. But as you rise higher, you must constantly adapt and never wear the public out with the same tactic. And I think that's so relevant in this modern day and age where our world, as we mentioned at the beginning, is changing so quickly. AI is leaving a lot of people behind, right? There is such a need to adapt and to be able to pivot. How important is that for people in your mind?
We already talked about David Bowie and how he did that back in the 70s, but I guess to a lot of people, that's about as relevant as Marcel Marceau back in the 19th century. So what are some examples of people who've reinvented themselves very recently? I guess we got to go Trump again. I mean, Trump reinvented himself from being essentially a real estate developer to being somewhat of a, I guess, basically TV personality, to being politician, and then whatever's going to emerge from that. So, that's a pretty obvious example that everybody would know of recreating yourself in the modern milieu.
Nice. Well, that is law number 6, guys. Court attention at all costs. We hope you found that interesting, insightful, and intriguing. And as always, we encourage you to go check out, subscribe to the Living Like a Bank podcast and share that with some friends, family, and loved ones. And we will see you again next time. Take care. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please be sure you subscribe on YouTube or the podcast on anchor.fm and follow me on social media at Metalpreneur. If you're ready to talk about building your own bank, use the QR code or go to rebrand.ly/buildabank. Be sure and join us for the next broadcast as together we learn to live and operate just like the banks do.